When it comes to this year's NBA free agency period, perhaps the biggest name available on the market was Portland Trailblazers All-Star LaMarcus Aldridge. And part of the reason I say he might have been the biggest name available is because a lot of the other big names that were on the market, up to and including guys like LeBron James, weren't really free agents in the sense that they aren't going anywhere. And a lot of the big names were ultimately going to be re-signed. So when you look at guys that were actually on the open market, guys that were actually a threat to leave their team, possibly going to leave their team, or in this case, very likely to leave their team, LaMarcus Aldridge probably ranked as, in terms of effectively being free agents, the number one free agent available on the market. And one of the names we had heard for several weeks now about a potential destination and landing spot for LaMarcus Aldridge was going to be the San Antonio Spurs. It was something outside of the norm, the realm of the usual for the Spurs to be big-time players in free agency and to go sign a big money guy like this. It's just not their nature. So I always wondered if that was actually going to be the case. While it would have meant Aldridge going back to his home state of Texas, and he would go into a contending situation, perhaps both right away and long term. I was wondering if that was actually going to happen, but as we found out a couple of days ago, that is indeed what happened. After doing some shopping around and making a lot of trips and a lot of visits, LaMarcus Aldridge has indeed decided to sign with the San Antonio Spurs with a 4-year, $80 million, I believe it is, contract or close to that, with an option for LaMarcus Aldridge to opt out after the third year. Big things popping down in San Antonio, down on the freaking Riverwalk, whatever the case might be. But anyways, I look at this deal, and in a lot of ways, it makes a lot of sense for both LaMarcus Aldridge and the San Antonio Spurs. It definitely has the Spurs poised to contend this year. You've got Tim Duncan coming back another year. You've got Kawhi Leonard re-signed long-term. You've got still an effective player at the point guard position in Tony Parker. They re-signed a very good DN3 player in Danny Green. While they've traded away Tiago Splitter and Aaron Baines, left via free agency, and Marco Bellinelli did as well, this is a team that, while it has lost some depth, has definitely increased in its star power and overall talent with the addition of a LaMarcus Aldridge. So definitely in the short term makes them a contender. It also positions the Spurs to be a contender long term. Even when Duncan is done, which may be after this season, and maybe Ginobili comes back another year, or maybe Ginobili retires. Either way, long term, you've still got a Tony Parker in the fold where even as his skills will start to decline in his 30s, he's still an effective NBA point guard. You'll have a Kawhi Leonard who's going to still continue to grow and get better as a player. And then you've got LaMarcus Aldridge. This is a team with that type of nucleus that could still contend long term, which is something that, after all those years in Portland where they would only get to a certain point, had to be appealing to LaMarcus Aldridge. The fact that he could contend not only this year, but going forward. And also from a Spurs standpoint, it allows them to avoid that big-time drop-off that often comes with being a team that's built for success for so long. At some point in time, the bottom's got to fall out, and the process starts over. Well, for the Spurs, this just delays that for years, and not just in a pass the buck, kick the bucket down the road type of way, but in a legitimately good way where they could still be a contender for years to come. Has to be appealing for both sides involved. This team will still have some cap room in the future while they're paying LaMarcus Aldridge a lot of money, and they're paying Kawhi Leonard a lot of money, Tony Parker a lot of money, with the salary cap due to increase big time after this next season. The Spurs are still going to have some money available in free agency to either bring in another star or a couple of role players to replace some of the guys like Splitter and Bellinelli and Baines that they lost in this offseason. So this is a team that can still add to what they've got going forward. Whatever Tim Duncan's going to make this year will come back free off the books. Whatever Ginobili might make if he actually plays this year, again, will come off the books. So it's a deal that while they're paying a lot, Aldridge is getting paid a lot. It still leaves the team some flexibility, which I think, again, appeals to both sides. LaMarcus Aldridge gets to play in his home state of Texas, which is why you were hearing a lot of talk about him going to the Spurs, or teams like the Mavericks and the Rockets interested in him. I think it was something that could be appealing, especially because of the fact that he gets to keep more of his money playing in Texas, with Texas not having a state income tax. Sure, there's always ways to compensate for that, like sales taxes, but most states have sales taxes to some degree. So you're looking at it, $80 million in Texas is worth more than $80 million in, let's say, California, like in Los Angeles, or even in a Portland, Oregon. So from a financial standpoint, it makes sense because you're getting to keep more of your money. And when you look at this contract and the options available to LaMarcus Aldridge, he's 29, he's going to be 30 later this year. He can opt out of this deal after 3 seasons, meaning that he can hit the open market potentially again at the age of 32, 33, where he still will be able to get one more huge payday for another 3 to 4 years, especially as a big man with his skill set. It might lend to him being able to hang around longer at a higher level than, let's say, guys that play on the perimeter. So it gives him the flexibility to get a lot of money now and at the same point in time still get more money going forward in the terms of one more huge pay deal, which is what most of these guys are looking for in their late 20s to set themselves up well for one last big payday before they hit their mid-30s. And I look at this from a stylistic standpoint and say it's a fit for both LaMarcus Aldridge and the Spurs. He's not a traditional just slow it down, back it down type of low post player. He's in a lot of ways what you classify to a certain degree as a stretch forward with some post game. There's no question about it. But when I look at his game and how it fits, it can fit very well to what the Spurs are going to do, and the Spurs can fit very well with what LaMarcus Aldridge is going to want to do, especially in the short term, because if you're bringing Tim Duncan back for one more season, which all indications and reports have been that Duncan's coming back, Duncan at this stage of his career, he can flip over and play center and do some of the things at the center position that LaMarcus Aldridge would need to have with somebody playing next to him in that front court, and LaMarcus Aldridge would want to have. Because one of the big things for LaMarcus Aldridge was that he always wanted to play the 4. He didn't want to play the center position. So now he's got a chance, at least in the short term, with Duncan still in the fold, to be able to play that power forward position that he covets and that he prefers. I do have some concerns about this. Number one is that the Spurs never really go big in free agency, and now they have. And sometimes that's a good thing, to be fair. Just because you've done it a certain way for so long doesn't mean that that's the way you should always do it. And at some point in time, you have to adjust. And sometimes situations and circumstances dictate that you go outside of the box of what you're comfortable with, your norms, and you do something different. And that's, in a lot of ways, what they did here. But there's also that concern of the fact that it's worked for so long with the San Antonio Spurs where they never really went and splurged big in free agency. Why all of a sudden do it now? And going in this type of mode and in this type of method to try and improve the team short-term and long-term, was that really the right way for them to go? Because now you're bringing a guy into a situation where a lot of these guys have played in the system for years, they understand their roles, and now LaMarcus Aldridge is going to be trying to figure out his fit. He'll be trying to figure out his role. At some point in time, will he? I'm sure he will, but will that necessarily come in his first year? I think that's a serious question because a lot of what the Spurs are about is about continuity. It's about cohesiveness. It's about chemistry. Well, when you bring a new piece into the fold, that cohesion, that chemistry can always be a big-time question. And then I also look at this team with losing Baines, and in particular the trading of Tiago Splitter to the Atlanta Hawks. Who will play center for the Spurs long-term once Duncan is gone? Because, again, LaMarcus Aldridge doesn't want to play the 5, doesn't like to play the 5, prefers to play the 4. And based off of his skills and what he brings to the table, frankly, he should play the 4. So as a result, you're going to have some type of defensive-minded, lane-clogging type of shot-blocking defensive presence at the 5, and there just really isn't that guy long-term on the roster. And now maybe they'll go into free agency in another year and be able to find that guy, or they'll have to go into the trade market to find that guy. The problem is, though, is that they're always drafting in the mid to late 20s every year in the NBA draft, so it's not that easy for them to necessarily find that guy. Although with all the draft and stashing that they do, at some point in time they may. But that's a legitimate question. It's the unknown right now, is who's going to play center for this team long term? Because part of the point of bringing in a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge is to get the most out of him, get the most bang for your buck, and put him in the best possible situations to succeed, first for himself, and then ultimately, as a result, for himself of the team. And if you're putting him out of position, playing him at the 5 where he's not comfortable and he's not the best fit at, that's not necessarily the right thing to do. So I have a concern about that long term, is who's going to play center next to LaMarcus Aldridge. And part of my concern is, while I understand that LaMarcus Aldridge has been the guy in Portland for close to a decade, and maybe there was some resentment there for him for years in the fact that he was there, he was Portland's one guy, and then when Damian Lillard came in, all of a sudden it became about Damian Lillard. He's the one getting the State Farm commercials. He's the one being viewed as a franchise player. He's the one that everybody's talking about first when they think about Rip City and the Portland Trail Blazers. And LaMarcus Aldridge maybe resented that, and somewhat understandably so. Is he really going to be happy coming into an organization where, in a lot of ways, the head coach is the big star, if we want to be honest about it? And if we don't view it that way, it's ultimately Tim Duncan's team. And even once Tim Duncan is gone, it's still going to be Kawhi Leonard and Tony Parker's team. Now, maybe this is different because the perspective is different. The perspective has changed. And the fact that he'll be closer to contending for a championship, LaMarcus Aldridge will ignore some of that. And maybe it was just a thing that had been building for years in Portland with the way they viewed him and they treated him, the way he felt, rightly or wrongly, what have you. But if that's something important to him, that he gets credit, and that he's treated like he's the guy, is he ever going to be the guy on a team with Kawhi Leonard and Tony Parker? Is he going to be happy in that type of situation, regardless of the money that he's getting paid? And the biggest concern I have of all is that there's been some history of LaMarcus Aldridge being a little bit of a pain. Oh, and I don't want to say a head case, like a DeMarcus Cousins type of head case, but he's been a guy that can be challenging to deal with at times. And when you look at a head coach like Greg Popovich, who understandably so and rightfully so is going to do Greg Popovich things the Greg Popovich way, is LaMarcus Aldridge going to be able to play for a Greg Popovich? Is he going to work well with a Greg Popovich? Is he going to become a Greg Popovich guy? Because Greg Popovich is very big on buy-in and believing in what he's saying and believing in the system and believing in that San Antonio Spurs Greg Popovich way. Now you get somebody that you're bringing in from the outside that is coming with 9 seasons of doing it LaMarcus Aldridge's Portland Trailblazers type of way. Is LaMarcus Aldridge going to be able to put some of his ego on the back burner to fully buy in and commit to this Greg Popovich San Antonio Spurs way of doing things? Is he going to become a Popovich guy? These are serious questions. Now look, at the end of the day, I agree with the signing. The Spurs had to do it. They had the money available. They were able to make the money available. The talent was there. There's a good fit there in a lot of ways. This makes sense on a lot of different levels. You're also going to see, though, a lot of people instantly crown the Spurs asses as the favorites maybe in the West to win the championship next year. And to which I say you've got to pump the brakes a little bit. Even if Ginobili comes back, he's another year older, which means he'll be even less effective. Tim Duncan, for all of his greatness, is another year older and damn near pushing 40 now. Tony Parker is going to be another year older, and his skills over the past couple of years have at least slowly declined. And all the while, you got to figure out the fit. You got to figure out if he's going to mesh with the system, if he's going to completely and totally buy in. Let's not totally crown their asses just yet. A lot of things are going to have to play out. It was a good move for the Spurs. They were in the position to do it, and they had to do it. If it doesn't work out well long term and it doesn't quite go according to plan, well, at least they ventured out and they made the effort. They had to do it. I just caution people to pump the brakes a little bit, because this is the same Spurs team with pretty much all the same players from the year before that had just won the NBA championship and beaten LeBron, Wade, and Bosh in the finals. This is the same team that lost to a Clippers team in 7 games that went on to piss away a 3-1 series lead against a Houston Rockets team. Just keep that in mind. And now when you factor in some of the depth that they've lost in Splitter and Bellinelli and Baines, it's easier said than done. Star power matters in the NBA, but you got to have those role players and you got to have those guys. And the Spurs have lost some depth through this deal with LaMarcus Aldridge. So what's going to happen? It'll be interesting to see. Like I said, I applaud the Spurs for doing it. I think from a basketball standpoint, it at least made some sense for LaMarcus Aldridge. It was a better fit, certainly, than it was going to be in LA or even in a Dallas or even a Houston. So we'll ultimately see. Time will tell.